Okay, so you might have been wondering, why haven't I uploaded any videos lately? First of all, I've been really busy. And second of all, I have quite literally just gotten brand new siblings!
No, I am not becoming a doll YouTuber, but do expect them to show up more often on this channel. Probably. But hello everyone, as the title says, yes, I am officially an owner of a pair of Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls. Which may seem surprising to most of you, considering the only time I ever mentioned being interested in the dolls was in a YouTube short, but it's not like any of my other interests introduce themselves gradually. Ghostbusters. Anywho, these two were bought at a small little antique store not too far off from where I live. But before I get into that, for the unaware viewers who might be concerned I'll get murdered by these two at night, here's a small history lesson. While the details of Raggedy Ann's backstory are mostly in the realm of myth, I'm going to be retelling the version of the story told by Johnny Corell's wife, Myrtle. Johnny Corell was going to his parents' home around the turn of the century when he found an old rag doll his mother made for his sister, Prudence, noting that the doll could make for a good story. A few years later, he would become the father of his daughter Marcella, getting inspired to write the Raggedy Ann stories when he first saw his daughter playing with her own dolls. He eventually created a patent for Raggedy Ann in May of 1915, modeling her after one of his daughter's dolls. However, unfortunately, due to an infected vaccination, Marcella passed away near the end of the year in November. But with little encouragement from his wife and the doll that inspired the character for inspiration, Johnny continued to write, eventually including Marcella in the book My Very Own Fairy Stories, which was released in 1917, and including her again in the book Raggedy Ann Stories, just 1 year later in 1918, finally publishing those stories he wrote those years ago. Now, in terms of my doll specifically, the story's a little funny. After getting a haircut at my local mall, I decided to stop by an antique store run by a family friend to get some Ghostbusters merchandise. However, he didn't have any, eventually directing me to a guy named John in a place not too far from the mall called the Cabal Expo. Unfortunately, while he did have the coolest store I've ever seen, he was completely blank on Ghostbusters merch. Though I decided to carry on in Cabal Expo, stopping by a few more nerd shops and antique stores, finding some of the most darndest of things. What the hell's this? And then I saw the Timeless Antique Store, run by a sweet old lady. And right at the front window, in a small case, were the duo, along with a couple of Raggedy Ann collectibles, and even another Raggedy Ann doll.
I also want to say that this one comes with a golden butterfly. It's so cool. Like, she's so... Look at her. I feel like I could just crumble her into a ball.
And while they weren't cheap to get, I got them for a price I will not disclose in the video for my own sake. Now with that out of the way, let's actually talk about the dolls. So for starters, after doing a bit of digging, I've come up with like a sort of basic idea of what these two dolls could be. So as mentioned in the story, these two dolls are Canadian, so they're now in possession of a hoser, eh? But they weren't the mass-produced type of dolls, like from, per se, Knickerbocker or Aurora. You see, back as early as the 40s, companies started making official sewing patterns for Raggedy Ann and Andy, so folks at home could make their own dolls. Most notably, the McCall Company, a company formed around 1913 by a guy called James McCall, which makes sense because, you know, you get the gist. And they started making patterns for Raggedy and Andy dolls as early as the 1940s, with this one, which had Anne with a cape over her head, like a little Red Riding Hood. And judging from some of the images and results of these patterns, I believe that the two dolls I have either follow pattern 5713, which was released around 1970 exactly, or 2531, which was released in 1977. For the people in the audience that actually do like Raggedy and Andy, you can kind of tell why that is a very important date. And this is also coming from pictures of the dolls that follow these patterns, because they don't really look too far off from these two that I have here in front of me. So with everything, I think I'm within reason to believe that these two are roughly from at least the early to mid 70s, so like 1970 to 77, Canadian, and use the patterns on the McCall Corporation. And for their age, they're in half decent shape. I say half decent because they aren't exactly the best. When I first bought them, they were already damaged. Andy in particular got his foot stuck in the floorboards and had to get it cut off, which was a Ragdolly reference, and sewn right back on. And it's also why, if as you may have noticed, that they do actually have plastic around their legs. This isn't from the packing or anything like that. This was something added later on to protect their legs from any tears. Annie, on the other hand, actually had a small tear in her armpit, which I found out around the third day of having it. And in general, they're both kind of dirty and really do smell like the attic. But aside from that, they're both in pretty good shape. While sun-faded, the colors still do pop out a little bit. They're not damaged beyond repair. The stitches still hold them together decently for the most part. And overall, they're not really that bad. Anyway, let's get on with actually talking about these two individually. Starting with the star of the show herself. As previously stated, aside from a small rip that was already stitched up, she's not in too bad shape and holds up well when traveling, which I'll talk about soon. And I think with Anne here, I could really highlight the amazing work done making these dolls. Remember, this was made by some ordinary person in the 70s, and she is phenomenally put together.
Especially when making details like her face, which is actually embroidered, and putting her hair together, which surprisingly hasn't dry rotted yet.
And I don't imagine that this was all too easy. So props to the person that made this all the way back then for putting together such a pretty looking doll.
The clothes she came with too is really pretty, with a sort of flower patchwork look that really does give off a special homemade vibe. And overall, I think she's a doll any collector would love to have in their collection. And then there's Andy.
Okay, for the record, I'm not trying to imply Andy is any less better than Anne, but I just have so much more to say when it comes to Andy. For instance, yeah, he does look a little funny, and you're not wrong to notice such. Compared to his sister, Andy was either stuffed with a little more stuffing, or was a little rounder when they were cutting up his pattern, because he's quite wider compared to his sister. It's most obvious with the head.
Of course, Andy's not complete without a hat, which he does have, but with the way the fabric aged, it looks more like a bald spot. And overall, compared to Annie, he's got a lot more quirks to him, from the aforementioned size difference and hat, to the fact that his right hand was definitely put on backwards. Which sounds odd, but listen.
That's Anne's hand, right? This is Andy's.
But despite these little quirks about him, I can still say the same about him as I said with Anne. He's well put together, even if his foot was cut off. He looks amazing, and he also has that same homemade charm his sister has. But he also has that extra layer of just being Andy, you know? Like, of course it's Andy that's slightly wider and has his right hand backwards. But I think that just makes him even more special. Just proves why he's the best boy in the playroom. Or in my case, the bedroom. So overall, what do I think of these two? I honestly feel like I hit the jackpot getting them. They're both really unique, really special, and I genuinely never thought I'd see the day I get any sort of Raggedy Ann dolls. So being able to have these two really means a lot to me. And for anyone that's still looking to get their own doll, visit a timeless antique store and try to capture the gold butterfly Ann, which is very likely still in the store even as I record this video. Not confirmed though. As for the future plans for these two, honestly, I really don't know. I want them to have some new clothes to match the dolls in the 1977 film, or even make a camel for them. But I do not know how to sew, so these plans will probably stay in my head for a good while. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video showcasing both my Anne and Andy dolls, because genuinely, I really do feel happy having these two in my possession. Do what you usually do at the end of the video, look after yourself, and do know I do have something planned with Anne. But I'll talk about that some other time. Goodbye!
You really see it that way?
Just that lovely